Welcome back to another episode of the Be the CEO of Your Life and Business podcast. So today we are diving right into insecurities with a topic that has actually, and I didn't even tell you this, it's been recurring for me this entire week in all of the personal development that I have been consuming, including my workouts. And it's the idea of comparison being the thief of joy. And what comparison and imposter syndrome have to do with stunting your own growth and like realizing your own potential. So this topic, it's so wild. You're going to love this. I was doing a workout this morning. It's one of my favorite trainers. And I was doing this workout and this was the theme of the workout. Amwala Caesar.
Of course.
Yeah. And he's just like so calming. I love it so much. So I'm doing this workout and he's talking about comparison. He's like, there is no competition in this world. And I'm like, what? That's how you're going to open this? Like, this is weird. Like, no, of course there's competition. Like you always say that you're competing against the version that you were yesterday, whatever. So I'm like, all right, let me lean into this and listen to this a bit. And he went on to talk about how comparison is the thief of joy, which is a very famous phrase, buzzword, not ours. And you know, I've heard this over and over again, and I think, worked really, really hard, just like in my own personal journey, to try and make sure that I'm not comparing myself to other people, other females, other whoever, anybody, family members, whatever it is. I've had to work really, really hard and be very active about that because I've just had insecurities all of my life about that idea. So I'm listening to this topic. We have some really exciting stuff happening business-wise. And one of the things that keeps popping up for me is this idea of like imposter syndrome of like, are we going to be able to grow and expand our firm? And am I going to be able to like live up to how we're growing? And am I doing it right? Like, am I doing it in a way that's successful? There's all of these limiting beliefs and thoughts that kept on coming into my head, and they've been living there rent free for the past like few days in particular. So when this theme came up this morning, it was almost like the universe or God nudging me to be like, hello, pay attention. And then I finished my workout and I'm like, you know what? I want to go for just a quick walk. I have some time this morning. I'm going to go for a quick walk around the neighborhood. And I was like, I think I want to search for a podcast on this topic. So I go and I Google Rachel Hollis, and because I know she does a lot of talk about comparison, and I really do like her perspective on this topic. The podcast episode that she launched today is about comparison.
Is that the one where she announced her engagement?
No, this was her. She had a Rise conference,
right?
And she was talking to one particular audience member, and this is one of her like Ask Rach episodes. Right. And she gave us all of the content from that conference where she was coaching this woman who was like comparing herself to her sister and how she can't live up to the standards that her mom set, and like on a very personal level. Right. But I'm like, what are the odds that this topic is now coming up again, of course, in this context? So it was the first thing I saw when I go and I open up my podcast. So I'm like, all right, I got to consume this. And so reason I want to talk about this is because especially in, I think, our line of work in the legal profession, there are not a lot of women that look like Laura and I in this space, building the business that we're building. And so what I think that I've been struggling with is naturally trying to draw comparison to other successful women who are running practices like us, almost like trying to draw those comparisons for a sense of community of like, look, we're all in this together. We're all doing the same thing. But what happens then is that I then get trapped in this idea of like, well, am I doing it as well as she is? And do I have enough success at this point where she had success at this point in her career? And so when you start going down that rabbit hole and really like making those assumptions about where you should be, or thinking that, you have to draw these comparisons in order to gauge how you're going to be successful, it can really trap you in a place of like imposter syndrome of like, I can't live up to the standards that this one has set. So yeah, that's what I want to talk about today.
It's a very real topic. For me, it's shown up a little bit differently throughout the course of my career. For me, I always felt like I had to be more like the men that I was
Mm.
going up against. And even the women who we've come across that acted more like the men that we knew.
Yes.
And I always struggled with that because that's not me.
Mhm.
And so because that's not me, I always felt like I wasn't as good as they were if I wasn't, super aggressive and nasty and just, so extroverted like them. I felt like I wasn't good enough. So that's
Yeah.
how that has shown up for me. And one person that always comes to mind in particular, I used to really like measure my own performance against him and say, well, you don't act like him, so you're not as good as he is. And it could not have been further from the truth, because that is not who I am.
Mhm.
And if I'm not showing up as who I really am, then I'm not as good as I could be. Does that make sense?
Oh my God, it makes so much sense. And it makes me think that the work that we're doing on self-worth right now through reading Jamie Kern Lima's book is like the perfect complement to, or like counteracting agent to imposter syndrome, because you just said it perfectly. Like, if you don't believe that you are good enough in how you do things, you are going to compare yourself to being like, I'm not as good as they are. Like, if you don't have that sense of self-worth, that you showing up the authentic way that Laura Katina practices law, then you're obviously never going to measure up to anybody,
Right.
because you're never going to think that you're good enough.
But think about this. Why are we so happy where we are now? Because we're building our firm the way we want to build it.
Yeah.
Right. So we're
Yeah.
not building it like the firm that we came from. We're not building it like somebody else's firm. And while that model and that behavior might work for them, it's not who we are.
Yeah.
And I think that over the last couple of years, since we've been out on our own, we've become more authentic and true to who we are and the firm we want to build. So that's why we're so much more at peace with where we are.
Yeah.
Right.
Until this latest bout of imposter
Right.
syndrome just crept right back up. And I was like,
Right.
no.
But it goes back to the issue we were just talking about. Like,
Yeah.
we are not that person. We are not this person. Like, we are who we are.
Yeah.
And just because somebody else builds a successful firm in a certain way, doesn't mean that we can't be successful the way we're doing it,
Yeah.
because we are successful the way we're doing it.
Totally.
Right.
Totally. Yeah. I totally can agree with that.
Yeah.
Oh, so, and the reason that I think that this is so hard for me in particular, and I think generally women in general, we have much more of like a comparison imposter syndrome tendency than men do. Like, they just show up, they try to take over their space, they try to be the guy that they are, whatever. And for us, we're always looking for that sense of approval, that sense of belonging, that sense of, you lived up to the expectations. Like, there's always that underlying force, that driving force of like, are you doing well enough? Right. And I don't know who is going to judge that at the end of the day, because really at the end of the day, it's who you keep showing up as, and if you're proud of the person that you're showing up as. But that's always been an underlying thing for me of like, how are you going to be measured? Who's going to tell you that you're not doing it the right way ultimately? Right.
Somebody else who has different standards than you.
Yeah.
Like, who cares?
Yeah.
It's just like, you're doing a great job for the clients that you're serving and all this stuff. And we're building this firm the way we want to. I think another struggle that, women can have is as working moms. Like, when my kids were younger, and I still can't do it now, I could not stay in the office until 9 o'clock at night with 3 babies at home.
Yeah.
Like some other people that I was working with, unless I wanted to give up seeing my kids, and I was not willing to do that.
Yeah.
I could have had a nanny, and we tried that for a period of time, but I still wanted to be home to see them.
Yeah.
So, I really struggled for years with feeling like I was not, as good because I wasn't in the office till 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
I wasn't working late anymore. It didn't mean that I didn't go on my computer later at night when I was home.
Yeah.
But that physical act of being in the office was like such a comparison game. The whole FaceTime issue, which drives me insane.
So
A
dumb.
whole other episode. But because I couldn't give that FaceTime to the office, I felt like I wasn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that went on for years. I told you
Yeah.
years ago, when I worked for a big firm and I had my shoulder surgery,
Mm.
how I had to ask for permission to leave at 5:30 to go to physical therapy. And they were like, oh, well, you're leaving during lunchtime, blah, blah, blah. And it was like a big joke.
Yeah.
But I literally had to ask somebody if I could leave at 5:30.
That
When
is,
I was there from 7:30 in the morning, like I used to get there really early. So it's not like I was rolling in at 10
right.
and asking to leave at 5:30. Like I
Right.
used to be there between 7:30 and 8 o'clock in the morning. And I had to ask for permission to leave at 5:30.
Which is part of the reason why we're not building a firm that looks like that.
Right.
Because that's just wild to us. And I think it's also, one of the things that I think we value so much and we don't outwardly say it is the fact that we are moms that are building this business at the same time when our kids are young. Like, although our kids are of different ages, our kids are still young and they still need us,
Mhm.
right? And so in thinking of like certain particular people that I have been struggling in with this comparison game and this imposter syndrome, I'm looking at them and I'm like, okay, but their kids are in like high school and college and they don't have to be so, reliant of their mom
Yeah.
being home and taking them to practices and, taking care of them. Right. And right now I'm in a phase where like, and I love this phase of my kids' lives. It's crazy, but I love it. But I have to be there and I
Right.
have to be taking care of them and I have to be pouring into them. And
But
so
that's what you want.
but that's
You
what I
can
want.
hire somebody else to do it.
Oh, correct. That's what I want, right? So what I think our value from this period of building our firm comes from is that we're doing it in the way that we can still organically and authentically show up as the women that we want to be, because we want to be those family people. Like we want to be able to leave at 4:45 to make it to a soccer game or a baseball game or a softball game. We want to be able to enjoy those things. And we also want our people on our team to feel like they can enjoy it.
Yes.
But
And
to,
that's okay.
and to know that like we fill in the gap in other areas. Like if that means that we have to shift our schedule around, or if that means we have to address things after that, then we'll do it. But so it's that combination of working really hard, giving a damn, and also like embracing the many different facets of ourselves.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean you're not as good as somebody else.
Right.
Because like my mindset has shifted so tremendously in this area because it had to. Even like yesterday, I had to pick Kaylee up from her social hour at school at 3:45, and I don't care. I walked out the door thankfully her school is like 30 seconds from our office.
Mhm.
Walked out the door, 3:40, picked her up, went back home, got back on my computer and finished what I had to do. Like, it's okay that you're not like in your chair in the office 24/7.
Yeah.
And that is something that I struggled with for a very long time. I do think the mentality has shifted in general, like a small amount just because of COVID.
Yeah.
And so many more people like recognizing that you can do work outside of the office.
Right.
But there were periods of time where I had to do work from home when I was with our last firm, and it was like a whole to-do.
Well, and that's the problem, right? So not only have we had to deprogram from where we were previously, because that was not the way that we wanted to build this firm, right? So there's
Right.
that one piece, but we also had to deprogram what we were being told was our value.
Mhm.
And I will never forget some of the conversations that
Ugh.
we had where our value was reduced down to just like billable hours.
Right.
Oh, but you're not reaching this benchmark. You're not hitting this goal. You should be at this point. If you were here longer, you would be able to do this. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, but did we not just handle all of the HR issues that you were having in your office that you want to
Right.
ignore yourself?
Yeah.
Like there were other pockets of value that we were providing. But when you're consistently told that that's where your value lies, that's a lot of deprogramming in itself, where you then have to say, wait a second, if I'm not meeting this benchmark, am I still valuable?
Yeah.
And what I've had to really work on overcoming is my role here is so different
Oh
than
my
what
God.
it was. And it's changed over the past 4 years of business than what it was when I first walked out the door and joined in partnership with Laura.
Yeah.
Like what that looked like for us when it was just you and me is so different than what it looks like now, and so different of what it's going to look like in the next 6 months.
Yeah, very different.
Yeah.
And I think that that's, what we're really struggling with is it, but it's important in any role that you're in to think about like, who do you want to be?
Yeah.
Right? If you are building your own business, how do you want to build that business? What do you want it to look like? Forget about what somebody else is doing down the street. But what do you want it to be?
Yeah.
It's such an important question. And it's very easy to, look at somebody else's social media and say, oh my God, I should be doing what they're doing and all this
Yeah.
stuff. But we have really had to like hone in on everything from our color scheme to what we want our social media to look like, because we want to be on brand, which to me means authentic.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And so this is where to like kind of wrap up where this conversation is going. This is why I really enjoy and value having Laura as my partner, because here's why. What I started with was comparison is the thief of joy. Because I kept comparing myself, because I had this imposter syndrome, because I had all of these negative limiting beliefs like creeping up, I lost sight of the joy and I needed to be reminded. And it took a little pep talk from Laura, literally before we started this podcast recording today, to be like, but why do we love the way that we're doing things? Like, why do we love the building that we're in? Why do we love the team that we're building? To remind me of all of the good, because when you start looking outside of what you have and what you're building that you're happy in every other day, and you start looking at everybody else, it's naturally going to make you be negative and like, oh, maybe we aren't doing it right. Maybe. But when you start reshifting your focus to saying, what are the things I'm doing really well? Like what aspects of the business and what aspects of the location and what aspects of the culture do you love? And start focusing on that. At least for me, it made me feel better. It made me feel like, yes, this feels more authentic to me.
Yeah. And look, comparison is so real, right? And I think especially in our profession,
Yeah.
I'm sure it exists everywhere else too, but I mean, this is where we are, so this is what we know.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to compare yourself to what somebody else is doing.
Yeah.
And like I said, you don't have to be a business owner to understand this conversation. Like I went through this and suffered with this for years, literally years. This is my 22nd year practicing law, and this went on for forever.
Yeah.
Right. Especially after I had kids. And I have no doubt that there are other women that are suffering from the same type of concepts. But you know what? Personal development helps. Having conversations with other women about it helps. I'm sure men suffer from it too. But this is our role. So this is what we understand as women.
Yeah.
I'm sure that plenty of other people suffer with the same thing, but you really have to think about who you are, what are your values, where do you want to be? And if you're like us building your own business, like, what do you want that to look like? Forget about what everybody else is doing. Just because something is right for somebody else doesn't mean it's right for you. So yes, imposter syndrome, all these different things are very real. But you really have to look inside and examine yourself and see what exactly is, the role that you want to play and what you want to be building. So we hope these tips were helpful. We thank you for spending time with us, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.